It looks like some people are still away on holiday, which is good. And I guess we'll get started this morning. Thanks to John, he bailed me out of some technical difficulties, so we're covered now. Is that supposed to be? I've never seen that. How does that work? How about now? Is he gone now? That's weird. It was recording everything I said. Watch out. So last week, Mike taught, and we were talking about dealing with grief, and we looked at David, and I guess as I was kind of reflecting on that class, it seems like, at least for me, you think of him as kind of the mighty warrior, this all-powerful king, and it's easy to kind of forget some of the things that he had to deal with, with the loss of Saul, loss of his best friend Jonathan, going through the grief. Mike kind of touched on that quite a bit, and as I was thinking through a lot of that, it sort of struck me as, I don't know about you, but I know as I'm kind of, we talk about, different characters in the Bible, or we read different stories, it's easy for me to kind of forget that they were human just like we were, and they faced the same things that we do. And, like we see, we'll see today, we're going to go back a little bit and look at David's life before Saul and Jonathan are killed. And as I'm thinking through this, it's like, I read through it, but I realize I don't think too much about the emotion or the challenges and the things that they must have been going through, the things that we face. And I think it's easy for me, at least, I guess, to realize that, or forget to realize that, the troubles that I have, well, it's no different than what they were facing either. They had the same challenges of food and how they were going to provide and how they were going to do all of this on top of all the other battles that they were facing and all the other struggles. So for this week, we're going to look at despair, and I think there's some similarities, and when we look at grief and despair, and we'll talk through a little bit about that. One thing that is a little different, we're going to kind of jump back into 1 Samuel. I know we kind of hit chapter 31 last week, and then in the 2 Samuel, I had asked Clint if I could teach this class, but wanted to change up the order because I was out of town and some things. So we're going to jump back. So now you got to unwind, and Saul's not dead, Jonathan's not dead, so they're still around, and we're going to kind of look through some of the challenges and things that David faced before it got to that point. So despair, what is it? No hope. Yep. For sure, and I think that's the definition: loss or absence of hope. So next question: what does it feel like?
Mike talked last week about comparing grief with fear. I think despair probably has some fear.
Okay. Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
Yeah. Where do we go from here? Some unknown, right?
Feels like helplessness.
Helplessness, right? You don't know what to do.
And it just never ends. You can't see the end of it.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it, isn't it? Because if you can see the end, it's not despair. But the fact that you can't see how you're going to get out of that situation, that's what puts you in that situation, and where you feel hopeless and the fear of not knowing how you're going to get out of that situation. So I threw a couple of these things out, and seeing no way out, the weight of the world on your shoulders with no support, right? Sometimes you feel alone. It's that feeling that there's nobody there to help you, or nobody going through the same stuff that you're going through. That feeling of complete abandonment, and I think for sure by friends and loved ones. Sometimes we probably do that on our own, right? We're the ones who kind of pull back, and so it feels like we've been abandoned. But really, it might be us. But then we also can look and say, I think God's abandoned me. And I think we see examples of that in Scripture. And we'll see, maybe David felt a little bit like that today. So the question I have is there a link between grief and despair? And if so, what do you think that link is? Or is there no link?
I think grief can lead to despair. I mean, if you're dealing with loss or whatever, then you can get to the point where I don't see how this is ever going to end.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that's, as I was going through this, it's like, I think that may be sort of the logical reason why the author of the book decided, hey, we want to talk about grief and despair. Maybe not always does one lead to the other, but I think it's very common that it can. If you can be in such a bad place from whether grieving, sadness, whatever that looks like, you don't see how you're going to get out of it. Just through some of the circumstances you go through. And I think it comes back to, Mike kind of highlighted some of the 5 stages of grief. Well, what happens if we don't get to that 5th stage where we're okay and we're moving on? If you don't get there, chances are you go the other way and you're regressing into that potential despair. The author had this phrase, what do we do when we don't know what to do? Right? That's the ultimate, I don't know where to go, so what do I do? I'm stuck and I don't see a way out. So, what are some events that might lead to despair? What are some things that can happen in life?
I mean, for David, he had to leave his home in the palace. He had to leave everybody.
Yeah. Yep.
He had to live in the wilderness for what, I don't know, 8, 10 years at least.
Yeah.
How do you do that? He had to support 600 families.
Right. And we're going to look at that for sure. And so when you think about that, yeah, think about going from living in or being with the king, right? You were there, you had everything, and now you're on the run and you're facing life and death situations and having to support people. What about the pandemic? People who didn't recover from the pandemic, still struggling with the pandemic, right? You have forced isolation, you have no travel, no relief, you don't have masks, you can't see emotions. Things like that can lead people to a very dark place in life. And I think it's easy to, maybe for us to realize, we still had worship on Sundays that we, albeit remote, but there was communication, there was connection. People who don't have that, think about how their lives were different. Restaurants were closed, couldn't go there. Couldn't travel, or I guess you could drive, but no place is open. So you're not going to be able to go do the things that you needed to have a relief from the day to day. And so unless you had really that support structure in place, could be a very, very big case of despair. Loss of a job, right? Especially in a pandemic, with high costs of living, rental prices around here, right? That's a real thing. House payments, increases in food costs, all that stuff. Those are the things that can pile on, and it's easy for people to get caught up. And we say, I don't know how we're going to survive. I don't know what we're going to do. Spouse being unfaithful or divorce. How about abusive relationships? Significant health problems. All of this stuff can really, and especially if you get one or more of these, right, then it really snowballs fast. And it's interesting, things in my life that didn't turn out the way I hoped. I've seen this with my mother-in-law. She really, really longs for the life she had in California. And because when they moved up here, they had all these big plans and dreams. Well, then a health issue pops up, and it derails that stuff. And so now the dreams and the ideas and the plans that you have, well, they don't work anymore. Can't do them anymore because now there's other things that become the priority. And so, if you're unable to deal with some of that, that becomes a real struggle. Death of a spouse, child, close friend. Have you been here? Right? So a lot of us have, or know someone who has been. And I think it's going to be interesting as we look at David's life to see, some of the things that he was going through. Again, we're going to look at just a small little 4 chapters, and this only touches on the things that obviously God wanted us to know, not all the other little things that were going on that we don't see. So let's talk about some effects of despair. How about withdrawal from friends and family and God? Do we see this? I think coming out of the pandemic, we've seen this a lot, right? It's a struggle to get people back in. People have been pulled away for whatever reason. Also, I think it's easy to, when you face some of these things, it's easy to think that the church family is, all eyes are on you, and people, if you expose, what your struggles are, that, well, now I'm going to be looked down upon as weak, or, hey, I'm not strong enough to get through this, and now everyone's looking at me. But in actuality, the exact opposite happens, right? That's where you need that conversation. People turn to drugs, looking for a way to free the body from pain, from this hopelessness that we talked about, the despair, don't know what else to do, so, well, this is all I know. It's a release. Mass shootings make everyone else feel the pain. I mean, these are real things. Now, I don't know. I'm not going to say that I'm the expert. I'm going to say this is why these things happen. But there's got to be some sort of severe lack of hope in these people's lives that these things take place. The murder, suicide, the definitive end. This one, as I was kind of preparing for the class, it got me to thinking about just how prevalent suicide is. I mean, you probably know, maybe not, if it's not directly, of a, one person removed who, their loved one has committed suicide. I have a guy I work with that his son did several years ago, and it's just, I've seen the impact, that can have. But it's the hopelessness that people have, and they think that's the only place to turn. So one of the things I went through and looked at is I wanted to at least kind of pull some numbers on. I was interested in the suicide thought. I was like, how bad is it? Like how if we were to really understand like what our world is going through today, what does it look like? So I found this chart. This is from the CDC. This is from 2020. So what I thought was very interesting is, look at this. Suicide is number 2 or 3 in the age groups of 10 to 34. So number 2 or 3 cause of death. And it's number 4 for the next group. So that pretty much takes care of most of the age group in here, except there's a few others that are maybe in these other ranges. But you can see how big of a problem it is. And I guess the other thing is, look here, unintentional injury. We got to be very careful to not do anything that's going to jeopardize I don't know if these are stupid things or accidents, but apparently we're accident prone until we get to 45, and then it drops down here. So, but you look at it and you just say, it's a problem. There's a lot of despair out there, and probably more than maybe what we even know. So let's look at the life of David. Turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 26, if you would. So let me set the stage here. So David is in the caves. He's hiding. As was mentioned, he's got his 600 men he's having to somehow care for, or that are with him, and I assume that's probably 600 men plus their wives and kids, or whatever that looks like. So he's hiding out with a lot of people in the caves. Saul sends 3,000 men to go find him. Think about that. When we have a missing person or something, right, and we send like hey, we need a big team to go out and try and find this little boy or whoever's missing, we probably get 150 or 200 if we're lucky. Saul's got 3,000 men out there scouring the countryside trying to find David. So David hears about what Saul's trying to do, and he sends spies to go find out, hey, is Saul really coming after me, and is he coming with 3,000 men? And so then David finds out, yes, that's what's happening, and by the way, we know they're camped over there, okay? So we know exactly where they're camped, and so now David says, hey, who's going to go with me down to the camp? I want to go confront Saul. And so he gets Abishai to step up and say, yep, I'll go with you. Let's go talk to Saul. Let's go figure this out. And so if you'll turn to verse 7 through 12, let's let's read that if someone who wants to read 1 Samuel 26, 7 through 12.
That night David and Abishai came to the troops, and Saul was lying there asleep in the inner circle of the camp, with his spear stuck in the ground by his head. Abner and the troops were lying around him. Then Abishai said to David, "Today God has delivered your enemy to you. Let me thrust the spear through him into the ground just once. I won't have to strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him, for who can lift a hand against the Lord's anointed and be innocent?" David added, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will certainly strike him down. Either his day will come, or he will die, and he will go into battle and perish. However, because of the Lord, I will never lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. Instead, take the spear and the water jug by his head, and let's go." So David took the spear and the water jug by Saul's head, and they went their way. No one saw them, no one knew, and no one woke up. But they all remained asleep because a deep sleep from the Lord came over them.
Okay, so David goes down into the camp, and he's got Saul right there. He could lop off his head if he wanted to, do whatever. And he says, nope, it's not my place. Now, remember, David has already been on the run. He's in the caves. He's dealing with all this stuff. Now, is he full of despair yet? I don't know. But obviously he still realizes that this must not be part of God's plan. He's not going to take down God's anointed. So instead, they go up to the hill across from where he's camped, and he starts to taunt him, right? And starts to yell at him. And he basically says, "Hey, I've got your sword and your water jug. You know, your guy that was supposed to be awake defending you, well, he was taking a nap. And I could have killed you on the spot. I didn't." And so then let's jump down to verse 17. Somebody want to read verse 17 through 25?
Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And David said, "It is my voice, my lord, O king." And he said, "Why does my lord pursue after his servant? For what have I done? What evil is on my hands? Now therefore let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, Go, serve other gods. Now therefore let not my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of the Lord, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains." Do you want me to go through 25?
Yeah, please.
Then Saul said, "I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly and have made a great mistake." And David answered and said, "Here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation." Then Saul said to David, "Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them." So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place.
Okay. So you get a warm fuzzy if you're David? Blessed be you, David. You're going to do a lot of good things. Probably before I kill you. Right? So obviously, so now we have David on to the next chapter. And so here's where maybe despair starts to sink in a little bit for David. So he's been fearing for his life, and now he's got a decision to make. Do I turn to God and figure out what God wants for me, or do I just figure out how I think I'm going to survive? And David says, I'm going to make a gut call, and I'm going to go talk to the Philistines, right? So in verse 1 of chapter 27 says, Then David said in his heart, Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me any longer within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand. So things were bad enough that David thought there was no way out, and he says, I'll just go live with those guys. And so he does. And so he's given the village or the town of Ziklag, and he settles there and all of his men. And here he is now living amongst the people that they were never supposed to be associated with.
Not just that, he's taken 400 unmentionable parts from the Philistines, he'd rather go live with that people
Yeah.
than be even close to Saul. Like he considers them less dangerous than Saul.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, so so that's how bad things have gotten. Um, and I thought about this. Did David know he was chosen? He was chosen to lead God's people. He knew that, right? He was handpicked, hand selected, and so in the back of his mind, he had to be able to know that, okay, Saul can't kill me because I know what God's plan is, but you can imagine that with all of this stuff going on, you can't see that, and I think that's sort of how we get to, God's got a plan for us, but a lot of times we don't see it, we don't have maybe the vision that maybe David had or the foreknowledge, but it's easy to get stuck in that rut and not realize that, hey, there is a bigger plan here. I may not know it, but I know it is, and I got to stay the course, and at some point, I'm going to take a turn that's going to lead me to where I feel like it's going to be a better situation. So he's now living with the Philistines. Chapters 28 and 29, we see he lives among them for 1 year and 4 months, and he's going to battle, and he's fighting. He's not really, I don't think, associated with the Philistines, but he's going and fighting all these other groups and taking all their stuff, leaving no men or women alive. I mean, he's basically, hey, I'm going to go provide for my 600 people, and we're going to live here. Saul doesn't know where we're at, and we're just fight these other groups. And then finally, Saul realizes that God is no longer with him. We won't jump into it, but this is where he goes and he meets with the medium at Endor, and he says, "Hey, you've got to bring Samuel back. Samuel's dead. You got to bring him up. I got to talk to him." So she does. I don't know how all that worked, but apparently Saul was convinced that it was Samuel because it was a man in just plain clothes, and Samuel tells Saul that the kingdom will belong to David and that the Philistines are going to conquer Israel. So Saul learns, I guess, what he probably should have already known by now, is that the kingdom wasn't going to be his, and David was the chosen. Maybe he doesn't know that yet, but he should, because he knows why David was chosen. But here's the other thing: is in these chapters we see David preparing for battle. So the Philistines are getting ready to go battle the Israelites in what will likely be the conquering, where Saul dies and Jonathan and his two brothers die. And David's ready to go fight with the Philistines against Saul. Right? It's that bad that he's saying, I'll go fight that group, because if I go over there, he's going to try and kill me anyway, so I might as well just try and go help the Philistines defeat him, and then I'll figure out what comes next. Right? It's crazy. But that's how bad things had gotten for David. So turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 30, and here we see that, well, let me back up here 1 second. So what we didn't read, even though David wants to go fight with the Philistines, does anyone know what the Philistines told him? Philistines tell him, we don't want you. We don't trust you. How do we know that you're not going to get right into the middle of the battle, and then all of a sudden you guys do a 180 and you start fighting us? Right? Fair? Right? I mean, if I was the Philistines, I'd probably think the same thing. Like, how do I know I can trust you? You've been fighting us for all this time, and now you say you're on our side. So the Philistine gods said that they didn't want him to go. And so David basically gets the boot. You're not able to stay here and fight with us, so go back to where you were from. And then that's where he gets back to Ziklag in chapter 30. So David returns, and what does he find? He finds the city burned, and all of the women and children are gone, taken captive. So look at 1 Samuel 30, verses 4 through 6. And there it says, Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. So can you imagine this? So now not only is David dealing with his own issues, now he's got all of these 600 people plus all the women and children that he's been leading. Now they're turning on him because we went out to fight, didn't happen, come back, and now our town has been ravaged, everything's gone, and our women and children are gone. And now they're turning on him, trying to stone him. You know, it doesn't get much worse than that. Now, he could have still been having marital problems. He could have had, who knows what else is going on. We don't know about that. But, you know, as you look at this, it's like, look at David's struggles. Had to leave his hometown, flee for his life, hiding in caves. Goes to live with the enemy. He's prepared to go toe-to-toe fighting his own people. His homeland, or temporary residence, whatever you want to call it, is destroyed, burned to the ground. It's gone. And wives and children taken, and talk of stoning. Right? Crazy, like the stuff that David had to go through. Do you ever think he questioned why he was in the situation, if life was worth living, or what hope do I have left?
You know, I think you kind of see some of the, I don't know what you call it, conflict. He's living with the Philistines, and he's still raiding the people that God has said these people need to be destroyed.
Yeah.
So he's trying to do what God wants him to do, living with the wrong people. So, I mean, he just seems like he's a mess right now. And
Yeah.
he says, I'll join with the Philistines, I'll go to war with you guys. And they go, and he's like, great, I got nobody.
Yeah. Dana.
It's really kind of you can view it as a test of his faith in God, because all this time he's running away from Saul, he's been protected.
Mm-hmm.
But he kind of looks around at it and gets kind of a long-term view of it, and then decides that that's not going to be enough somehow. Then
Yeah.
goes and does this and view it as a rash act.
I guess my question for you might be: Do you think he realized God was with him and protecting him, or do you think that had kind of slipped his mind?
I don't know if he looks at it long term and just sees it as something that can't continue. It certainly doesn't seem like he's got anything from scriptures and God told him to go to the Philistines
Right.
and do this.
Right.
It's just he's acting out on his own again.
Yeah.
It seems like he's very much in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Zach.
Just find it hard to believe, and obviously we're reading it after the fact, so they have that benefit. But this is not like the first time by any means that God has saved him from Saul. Like, even before the cave, like 3 or 4 times that he tried to kill him in his
Yeah.
house. Like, it's just crazy to me that David like sees God protecting him, and he's so close to the source, and then he's like, "No, I'm gonna peace out. I'm gonna go to take Philistines." When
Yeah.
God has saved him how many times?
Right. Right. And yeah, Cindy.
Part of what I see is desperation. He doesn't know where to turn.
Mm-hmm.
The people that he's trusted his whole life have turned against him for no reason that he can fathom.
Yeah.
And he's desperate. And I think we get that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, Alex.
I think Saul shows the same desperation. Desperation as a king who's trying to lead his people, trying to go against David, and never succeed.
Yeah, Saul probably was in fear of, I mean, that's why he wanted David dead, right? Like, he didn't trust David. He was afraid David was going to kill him. So, you know, so that took over Saul's life, I'm sure. And absolutely, I think that's the same thing that happens is we get to a point where we don't know where to turn, we don't know what to do, and that's when all these outside influences can have an impact on us and our lives. Yeah.
And how often was he even going to God and asking God? Was he not in tune with him? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so Lynn is asking how often was he going to God? Was he praying to God? Was he asking for God's guidance or what? We don't know. I don't think we know that. Jeremy?
Just at the end of that verse that we read, it says, but David felt strengthened in the Lord his God. And so even right then in that moment,
Yeah.
there was a connection, there was a strong connection between David and God, and David felt that. And then if we keep reading, it does talk about that David, he did ask, he's like, hey, God, should I pursue him?
Yeah, we're going there.
Okay.
No, but you're exactly right, and I think that I intentionally stopped at the end of that verse because just to look at kind of what he was going through, and then you're right, it pops out and says, "But David was strengthened through God." Yeah, John.
I just want to point out, we do also have the benefit of David's Psalms that give us insight into what he's going through. And there are Psalms from this period of what he's going through as well. And there's a lot of, I think the word in the study of Psalms is disorientation, right? He's trying to figure out what's going on. I don't understand this. And he kind of works his way through it and works his way back to God's still in control.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think we can know that he did struggle with some of this because he definitely pours his heart out in the Psalms.
Sure. Dana?
I think the takeaway from us from this is he might have been looking for the end game that was somehow his reconciliation to being back at the palace and things being like they were.
Yeah.
And instead of opening up to the reality of that things aren't going to be the same, but they're going to be all right with God.
Yeah.
And I think we can learn from that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Things don't always go back to how they were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, for us, in our minds, it's easy for us to think that that's the right way that things should end up, right? It's got to get back to the way it was. But we're never promised that. Things are going to change, life changes, and things happen. Let's look at verse 8 and 9 of 1 Samuel 30. And David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them?" He answered, "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue." So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those who were left behind stayed. So they had left a couple hundred men behind that didn't have the stamina to keep going. So they were tired. So all right, you guys rest. You hang out here. So they get back to him. And then says, but David pursued. He had 400 men, 200 stayed behind, who was too exhausted to cross the brook. Then let's jump down to verse 16 through 20. And here we see David defeats the Amalekites. And when he had taken him down, behold, they were spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing because of all the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day, and not a man escaped except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. As I thought about this, was this like the slowest flee on earth? Right? I actually looked, I was trying to find like a picture of like a group of people riding camels, because I'm like, that could not have been a fast, now I don't know camels. Maybe they can run faster than I give them credit, but that was just humorous as I was thinking through this. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil, or anything that had been taken. David brought it all back. David also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the livestock before him and said, "This is David's spoil." So we see David's success again as he's turned to God. And to John's point, yes, I'm sure his heart was still there. Like he knew his heart belonged to God, but I think at some point he had said, I don't know what God's plan is, so I've got to make my own, or this is where I'm going. So questions for you guys then. How do we deal with despair? And I guess here's the first clue. How did David deal with it? And remember, he's about to lose his best friend too.
In chapter 30, verse 6, the verse where you stop. He's in extremely difficult positions. The troops are going to stone him. They're all mad at him. And then it says, but David found strength. It seems like in that verse somewhere there's got to be a time span that we don't get.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's one of those things that as John mentioned, we see some of that in the Psalms that David writes and wrestles, and then he kind of has, the way I always think of it, is that deep breath moment where he goes, okay, but God's still in charge. And I mean, at some point, he obviously did this. I mean, he's in the mess that he's in, but then, like I said, the way we read it, it happens that fast that he trusts in God. But somehow, how we deal with despair, somehow we have to get to that moment.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Back in chapter 26, when he's yelling across to Saul, he said, what have I done? Why are you doing this to me?
Yeah.
And I think he's probably posing that same question to God.
Yeah.
Why am I in this situation?
Yeah. And we see that a lot, don't we? And we see it today. And it's easy for us, and I think that's one of the things, that we'll look at here in just a second is it's a lot of that, it's that fighting and pouring your soul out, not understanding. And I think that's the part of the challenge. We want to understand so bad. Like, why? Why does this have to happen to me? And if we can't come to terms with not understanding that, hey, we may not ever know why, but God's in control, and maybe someday we will. But in the short term, probably not. How have you dealt with despair in the past, positively or negatively? Or how have you seen it dealt with? Alex?
I always said that sometimes it's approached, if it's approached in a certain way, it can be a big problem.
Okay. What do you mean?
As in like, if you have a certain situation that you've seen the worst.
Yeah. Okay. So you've seen the worst, and you.
What is the motivation not to return that?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Cindy?
I think the answer to that question is both.
Yeah.
I think initially it's negatively, and I think as we search and go to God, it turns positive.
Okay. Yeah. And what about people that don't have God? It's a lot tougher to get to the positive side, isn't it?
I guess and so I haven't really gone through very negative despair, so I can't really speak, but I do think about, looking backwards to look forwards. We kind of talked about that a little bit with David and Goliath, and I often think again about Philippians 4, 4:6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God. And the part that always just stands out in that verse to me is with thanksgiving, and just finding a way to still being able to look back and recognize God's blessings in your life, that He has taken care of you, will take care of you. I think that's crucial.
Yeah.
I would say kind of in conjunction with John said, I think part of dealing with our despair is dealing with it honestly. It's really easy to go, this happened, this is terrible, terrible, terrible. But when we figure out that aspect of Thanksgiving and say, well, in all this terribleness, there was this glimmer of hope. There was this ray of sunshine or whatever, figure out
Yeah.
to honestly look at the entire situation.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that's true. The other thing that I think is something that's important is it takes having the Word of God on your heart and knowing and that strong faith and that foundation, so that you can, as you face some of these challenges, these trials and tribulations, you don't start from here and go lower, but maybe you start from here and go down to here. And you don't reach despair. My friend TJ, that's been on that's been on the prayer list. I haven't really updated everyone, but so he had a liver transplant maybe 6 or 8 years ago. Maybe not even that long. Maybe 5 years ago. His body's basically he went off the anti-rejection drugs. Things were sort of going okay. Now this liver's failing as well, and so. He was, as recent as 6 months ago, he was septic. He was down at the University of Utah Hospital again, and basically his liver was contaminating his whole body, had to put a drain in, all this stuff going on. And he's basically been told that, well, they're not going to he's sort of on the transplant list again, but basically the truth is, I won't get one unless I go septic again. And so I basically got to be this close to death again before they're even going to consider putting me. And I look at him and to know him and to see him. So I coached with him. That's how I got to know him. As well, not with him, but against him, I guess, at one point. And so the reason I even kind of got to build a relationship with him is, our team had lost to their team, and after the game, of course, you got little kids, and of course the waterworks are going, and it was just the most devastating thing. Well, he made it a point to go over and tell every one of our kids, man, you guys played a great game. I mean, no one else did that. No other coach I'd ever seen do that in Little League sports. Walked over to the boys and just praised them and said, hey, this is what's going on. And so we started to kind of build a relationship, and you would never know today that the guy even had anything wrong with him. Because he doesn't let that define how he lives his life. and I don't know what his religious background is, but I know he's starting to ask questions. He's starting to ask questions about church and where we go to church and what it's about. And so, there's those pieces too. Yes, sir.
So I've always thinking back on it, like we've been talking about it, and thinking about the times in my life when I've had the most despair. It's usually because I've tried to take control of my own life, and then I've like turned away from like listening to what God wants me to do in my life. And you can see this with David is like as this section of his life unfolds is I think it all started when he taunts Saul and then decides to go live with the Philistines without talking to God first.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And like and getting into some prayer with God and being like, what do you want me to do right now? And I've noticed that in my life too is when I try to take control of it and try to live my own way, that's when like one little thing will come along and it like spins me out of control real bad,
Mm-hmm.
and then I end up really like in a really bad place. And so maintaining that connection with God is what
Yeah.
really ultimately I think keep you out of despair. And like you said earlier, like what do people do if they don't have God? That's where we see all these problems in our society.
Exactly. Yeah, we try to blame it on politics or whatever else, right? But at the end of the day, it comes back to, do we have a relationship with God, and are we building our lives around that? So let me finish with maybe a couple practical tools that maybe will help you overcome despair. You can help someone else overcome despair. You need a strong faith, family support group, right? I mean, we see that, we know that, but a lot of times it's easy when, like I said, when you kind of get into that situation, it's easy to want to withdraw, right? You go through marriage issues. This is the last place sometimes you want to be. I can tell you firsthand. It's easy to withdraw because you sit in the back. You just want to. I got to go work this out on my own, and that's like Jeff was saying. That's the worst thing we can do. Keep your focus on the blessings you have, not maybe on the challenges you're facing today or have faced in the past, right? No matter what we do, and this is something that I've really tried to change my way of thinking a little bit is focus on the blessings. Even though there's a lot of things going on, I know that I'm far blessed more than 80% of the world, and yet, it sometimes seems like my problem's the biggest one. Remember, God is good and he will never forsake you. Romans 8:28. He works all things to good for those that love him and keep his commandments. Cast your cares and anxieties on him because he cares for you, 1 Peter 5:7. And a couple of, I don't know, maybe not biblical tools, but have you ever heard of Lou Tice? Has anyone ever heard of this guy? He's, I don't know, Clancy, not really a motivational speaker. He's a coach, right? A life coach, right? He's got a book called Smart Talk. And in the book, he talks about changing your perspective from one of negative and the fact that, oh no, my wife is sick, she's going to die, right? To my wife's sick, she's going to be better, and when she gets done, here's where we're going, and this is what we're going to do. These are all the good things we're going to do. And he kind of harnesses the power of the mind and just believes in how, sort of that self-fulfilling prophecy type of thing. Pete Carroll, the coach for the Seahawks, was huge into using this guy's stuff. And it's sort of positive coaching. It's more of a positive mindset thing. I'd encourage you, if you're struggling with it, read the book. It's a good book. It's pretty quick, easy read. You'll pull some nuggets out of there. And then this one, how many of you ever heard of the Navy SEAL William McRaven? Yeah, so he was asked to give the commencement speech at the University of Texas one time, and I guess I won't play it for you, but you can go look it up on YouTube. In that, he basically gives a commission to all of the graduating students. This was like back in 2014 or 15 or something like that. And he starts it off by basically saying how when he was going through SEAL training, every morning they had to start their day by getting up, making their bed. Bed had to be made perfect, corners folded in, had to be right. They would come through, they'd inspect it. None of them understood why in the world they had to make their bed. But he goes on to say you need to make your bed because, number one, you've now accomplished something for the day. Right? Rhonda made her, she didn't let her kids sleep in their bed. I'm just kidding. But make your bed because now you've accomplished something. And said when you go out and you go through the day and you have the worst day and it's just been awful and you might be frustrated, might even be down in despair, you come home and you get to jump into a made bed, right? And that's your signal that tomorrow's going to be better than today was. And it's just that thing of, hey, there's little things, take little steps that will keep you from that focus of despair. So check it out on YouTube. There, he goes through a whole bunch of other stuff. It's like 20 minutes long. I was only going to play for you a 2-minute clip, but you can check it out. It's a good listen. Thank you, guys.